The night began like many others for the server. The building was tall, bright, and filled with soft lights that reflected off polished floors. Luxury cars lined the entrance, and music played gently in the background as guests arrived one by one. The server adjusted their uniform, took a slow breath, and reminded themselves to stay calm. This was not a place to stand out. This was a place to blend in, move quietly, and do the job well. Inside the hall, everything looked expensive. Long tables were covered with white cloth. Crystal glasses sparkled under golden lights. The smell of rich food filled the air. Guests laughed loudly, greeting each other with confidence, talking about business deals, travel, and success. Many of them had never worried about rent or bills. The server noticed these things but kept their eyes down, focusing on trays and orders. The host of the party was a well-known millionaire. People spoke his name with respect and excitement. Tonight was meant to impress important guests, and nothing was supposed to go wrong. The server had worked many events like this before. Rich people, big smiles, small kindness, and sometimes quiet rudeness. It was all familiar. As the night moved forward, the server carried drinks, cleaned tables, and answered requests. Their movements were careful and smooth. No one paid much attention, and that was fine. Being invisible made the work easier. Still, deep inside, there was a quiet feeling that never left. A feeling tied to something they had once loved, something they no longer spoke about. Near the center of the hall stood a grand piano. It was black and shiny, placed under a soft spotlight. The server passed it many times while working. Each time, their eyes stayed on it a second longer than needed. Memories tried to rise, but they pushed them down. This was not the time or place for old dreams. The guests were waiting for live music to begin. It was written in the invitations. A professional pianist was supposed to arrive earlier in the evening. Minutes passed, then more minutes. People began to look around. Whispers spread from table to table. The host checked his phone, his smile slowly fading. Soon, frustration filled the air. The pianist had not arrived. Calls went unanswered. The host felt embarrassed. A few guests joked about it, but others looked annoyed. The room felt restless, like something was missing. The server noticed the change right away. They moved faster, hoping the tension would pass. But instead, the host raised his voice, asking the staff what was going on. No one had answers. The piano sat silent, waiting. Someone laughed and said maybe the party should continue without music. Another guest made a careless joke, looking around at the staff. Their eyes landed on the server. "Why not let one of them play?" the guest said with a grin. "At least it would be entertaining." Laughter followed. It was not cruel laughter, but it was not kind either. It was the kind that came from boredom and pride. The server froze for a moment, pretending not to hear. Their heart beat faster. The host looked over, half amused, half annoyed. His eyes rested on the server longer than expected. "Do you play?" he asked, not really expecting an answer. The server opened their mouth, then closed it. The room felt suddenly too quiet. Saying no would be easy. Saying yes felt dangerous. The truth was something they had hidden for years. The server began, then stopped. The words felt heavy. Another guest waved a hand. "Come on, it's just a joke," they said. "Unless you actually can play." More laughter followed. The server felt heat rise to their face. Old memories rushed in. Long nights, tired hands, broken hopes. All of it pressed against their chest. The host sighed. "We need something," he said. "The night is stalling." He looked at the server again. "If you can play even a little, it might help." There was pressure now. Not friendly pressure, but public pressure. The server felt small, standing there in front of people who had everything. For a moment, they wished they could disappear. They nodded slowly, almost without realizing it. "I can try," the server said quietly. The laughter softened into surprise. Some guests leaned forward. Others exchanged looks, clearly expecting a short and awkward show. The server's hands trembled as they walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavy. Their minds screamed to stop, to turn back. But something stronger pushed them forward. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was pain. Maybe it was the memory of who they once were. They sat on the bench. The piano felt cold under their fingers. The room was silent now, filled with curiosity and doubt. The server closed their eyes for a brief second and took a breath. They did not play yet. They thought of the past, of simpler days, of a small room with a worn-out piano, of practicing late into the night, dreaming of a future that never came, of promises broken by reality. The server opened their eyes. Their fingers rested on the keys, and the moment before the first note felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. The room waited. The millionaire leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, expecting very little. Guests held drinks mid-air. Smiles stayed ready, prepared to laugh or clap politely. The server's hands stopped shaking. The first note was about to be played, and with it, everything was about to change. The room stayed quiet as the server placed both hands on the piano keys. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Some guests shifted in their seats. A few raised their eyebrows, already expecting an awkward mistake. The server could feel all the eyes on them. It was heavy but also strange in a calm way. They pressed the first key. The sound was soft, almost careful, like a whisper. It floated through the room and settled in the air. A few people looked up, surprised that the note sounded clean. The server played another, then another, slowly building a simple melody. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was honest. The server's shoulders relaxed a little. The piano felt familiar, like an old friend they had not seen in years. Their fingers remembered things the mind had tried to forget. Each note carried a piece of the past. Some guests leaned forward. The laughter that had been waiting on their lips faded. Conversations stopped one by one. Glasses were gently placed on tables. The music was pulling attention without asking for it. The server continued, letting the melody grow. The sound became warmer, fuller. It was clear now that this was not random playing. This was skill shaped by time and effort. A few people exchanged surprised looks. The millionaire host straightened in his chair. His arms slowly dropped to his sides. He was no longer bored. His eyes stayed on the server, watching closely. The server played on, no longer thinking about the room. Their mind drifted backward, to nights when the world felt quiet and full of promise, to times when music was not a secret, but a dream. The melody changed. It became deeper, more emotional. It told a story without words, a story of struggle, hope, loss, and patience. The sound filled the large hall, touching corners where laughter once lived. A guest near the back felt a lump in their throat and did not understand why. Another closed their eyes, letting the music carry them. Someone else whispered, "This is real," barely audible. The server's hands moved with confidence now. The shaking was gone. Their breathing was steady. Every note felt necessary, as if the piano itself had been waiting for them to return. No one laughed anymore. The host glanced around the room and saw faces he had never seen before. Faces without masks. Faces that were listening. The server reached a quiet part of the piece. The music softened, slowing down. It felt like a pause in life, a moment to breathe. The room leaned into the silence between notes. Then the sound rose again, stronger, brighter. Not loud, but powerful in its calm strength. It felt like standing back up after falling many times. Some guests forgot they were at a party. For a moment, there were no titles, no wealth, no status. There was only sound and feeling. The server opened their eyes and looked at the keys. The piano reflected the lights above, and for a second, they saw their own face in the shine. Older, tired, but focused. They kept playing. A memory flashed through their mind. A time when someone once said music was not practical. When life demanded responsibility instead of dreams. When choices were made that could not be undone. The music carried that memory too, turning pain into something softer. The last section approached. The server felt it coming. They slowed slightly, letting each note land fully. The room held its breath. The final notes were gentle. They faded slowly, like a sunset disappearing behind the horizon. The sound lingered even after the keys were released. Silence filled the hall. It was not the awkward silence from before. It was deep and full. Then someone began to clap. At first it was just one person, then another, then many more. Applause grew quickly, filling the space with energy. Some guests stood up without realizing it. Others smiled in disbelief. The server stayed seated, hands resting on their lap. They did not bow. They did not smile. They felt something warm spread through their chest, something they had not felt in a long time. The host stood as well. His applause was slow but firm. His eyes stayed fixed on the server, filled with questions. When the clapping finally slowed, the host stepped forward. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. The server looked up, unsure how to answer. The room waited again. "It's been a long time," the server said quietly. The host nodded, understanding more than the words said. "You hid this well," he replied. Some guests laughed softly, not in mockery this time, but in surprise. Others shook their heads, embarrassed by their earlier jokes. The server stood up slowly. Their legs felt weak, but their heart felt steady. The night had already changed, and it was far from over. The server stepped away from the piano, but the feeling of the keys stayed in their hands. Applause still echoed softly in their ears. People were looking at them differently now. Not as background staff, not as someone invisible, but as someone they wanted to understand. The host invited the server to sit for a moment. It was unusual. Servers were not asked to sit at these events. The server hesitated, then agreed. A chair was pulled forward, and the distance between guest and staff quietly disappeared. Questions came gently this time. Not loud, not mocking. Simple questions. How long had they played? Why had they stopped? The server answered slowly, choosing words carefully. They spoke about learning when they were young, about loving music more than anything else, about life becoming heavy. They did not speak of bitterness, only truth. They talked about responsibilities that came too early, about choosing work over dreams, about believing for a long time that music belonged to the past. The guests listened. Some nodded. Some looked down, thinking of their own forgotten hopes. The host listened more than he spoke. He noticed the way the server held themselves. Strong but tired. Talented but careful. This was not someone chasing attention. This was someone who had learned to survive quietly. A guest asked why they never told anyone they could play. The server smiled softly. "No one ever asked," they said. That simple sentence stayed in the room. The party continued, but it felt different now. The music from speakers was turned off. The piano remained silent, but its presence was strong. Guests moved closer, talking in smaller groups. The night became calmer, more thoughtful. The server returned to work for a while, carrying trays again. But nothing felt the same. People thanked them when taking drinks. Some apologized for earlier jokes. Others simply smiled with respect. The server noticed the change and felt both warmth and confusion. Part of them enjoyed being seen. Another part feared it. Attention had once led to disappointment. Later, the host approached again. This time, his tone was serious but kind. He asked if the server would play one more short piece before the night ended. Not as a joke. Not as entertainment. As a request. The server hesitated. Playing once had already opened a door they had kept shut for years. Playing again felt like stepping through it. They agreed. The room quieted once more. This time, there was no laughter waiting. Only patience. The server sat at the piano and let their fingers rest. They played something different now. Softer. Simpler. A piece that felt like home. It did not try to impress. Spoke gently, like a conversation late at night. People listened with open hearts. Some smiled. Some felt tears form but did not wipe them away. The music made space for feelings no one had planned to bring to the party. When the last note faded, there was no rush to clap. The silence was enough. The host stood and thanked the server. Not with money, not with loud praise, but with honesty. He said the music had reminded him of things he had forgotten. He said talent like that should not be hidden. The server nodded, unsure what to say. As the night came to an end, guests slowly left. Many stopped to say goodbye to the server personally. A few wrote contact information on small cards. Others simply wished them well. The server gathered empty glasses and plates, returning the hall to quiet order. The lights dimmed. The piano sat alone again. When the work was finished, the host asked the server to stay back for a moment. The hall was nearly empty now. The noise and luxury felt far away. He spoke calmly. He said he wanted to help, but not in a way that felt forced. He offered support, guidance, and time. He said the server did not need to decide anything that night. The server listened, heart beating fast. Hope felt dangerous but real. They thanked him and said they would think about it. As the server left the building later that night, the city air felt different. The streetlights looked softer. The weight they had carried for years felt a little lighter. They did not know what would happen next. But for the first time in a long while, the future felt open. The days after the party felt strange for the server. Life returned to its usual rhythm, but something inside had shifted. The same uniform, the same long hours, the same quiet movements through busy rooms. Yet the memory of that night stayed close, following them like a soft echo. At work, they caught themselves thinking about the piano, about the sound of the keys and the silence that followed. Sometimes they paused for a moment, hands still, before reminding themselves to keep going. Bills still needed to be paid. Life did not pause just because hope had visited once. Messages from guests began to arrive. Short notes of encouragement. Simple words saying how the music had touched them. The server read each one carefully, unsure how to respond. Praise felt unfamiliar and heavy. They thanked people politely and said little more. One message stood out. It was from the host. He asked how they were doing and reminded them that the offer still stood. No pressure. Just a door left open. The server stared at the message for a long time. They remembered other doors in life. Doors that had closed suddenly. Promises that had faded when reality stepped in. Trust did not come easily anymore. That evening, the server sat alone in their small room. It was quiet except for distant street sounds. In the corner stood an old keyboard, dusty and rarely used. They turned it on for the first time in months. The sound was not as rich as the grand piano, but it was enough. They played slowly at first. Their fingers felt stiff, unsure. Then muscle memory returned. Notes began to flow, uneven but honest. The server felt a mix of comfort and sadness. Music had always been home, but it had also been a reminder of what was lost. They stopped playing and rested their hands. The question stayed in their mind. Was it too late to try again? The next day they replied to the host. A simple message. They agreed to meet. The meeting took place in a quiet space, far from crowds and noise. No fancy clothes, no cameras, just two people talking honestly. The host spoke about opportunity, but also about effort and patience. He made it clear that talent alone was not enough. It would take work. The server listened carefully. They asked questions. Real questions about expectations and time. They did not want empty promises. The host respected that. He said he was not interested in owning anyone's dream. He only wanted to help rebuild what had been pushed aside. They agreed on small steps, lessons, practice time, no rush. The server walked away feeling nervous but steady. This was not a miracle. This was a chance. Balancing work and music was not easy. Days were long. Nights were short. Sometimes the server felt too tired to play. But they showed up anyway. Even when the music sounded rough. Even when doubt whispered that this would fail. Slowly, improvement came. The server practiced in empty halls after work. Fingers aching. Mind focused. Music returned as discipline, not fantasy. Felt different now. Stronger. There were moments of frustration. Notes missed. Old fears returning. On those nights, the server reminded themselves of the silence after the last note at the party. Of the feeling of being heard. Weeks passed. The host checked in but did not push. He watched progress quietly. When he finally invited the server to play again, it was not at a party. It was in a small room with only a few listeners. The server played, not perfectly, but truthfully. The listeners nodded. One smiled. Another closed their eyes. That was enough. Afterward, the host spoke honestly. He said the server had something rare. Not just skill but depth. He said the world was loud, but people still listened when something real was offered. The server felt a calm confidence grow inside. Not excitement. Not pride. Just certainty. Life was still hard. Money was still tight. But the future no longer felt closed. One evening, after practice, the server walked home under city lights. They realized something had changed. They were not running from the past anymore. They were walking toward something new. The piano was no longer a secret. It was becoming a path. The first public performance after the party did not happen quickly. Time passed in quiet effort. The server kept working their regular job, kept practicing late at night, and kept learning how to trust the process. Some days felt hopeful. Other days felt heavy. But the piano was no longer something hidden in the past. It was part of daily life again. One evening, the host invited the server to a small gathering. It was not a luxury party. There were no bright lights or loud voices. Just a few chairs, a piano, and people who had come to listen. The server arrived early, dressed simply, heart beating fast. As they sat at the piano, they remembered the first night. The jokes, the pressure, the silence before the first note. This time felt different. There was no shame waiting in the room, only patience. They played. The music flowed with calm confidence, carried everything they had learned. The struggle, the discipline, the quiet hope that had grown over time. When the last note faded, the room stayed still for a moment. Then gentle applause filled the space. The server stood up slowly, breathing deep. This was not a surprise moment. This was earned. Over the next months, more chances came. Small events, private spaces, no rush to fame, no false promises, just steady steps forward. The server learned how to balance fear and courage. They learned how to speak about their journey without shame. Some nights, they still worked as a server. Other nights, they played music. Both worlds existed together for a while, and that was okay. One day, the host invited them back to the same hall where everything had begun. The grand piano still stood in the center. The lights were softer now. The room was empty. The server walked slowly toward the piano and sat down. They placed their hands on the keys not to perform but to remember. They played a few quiet notes, smiling softly. The host listened from a distance. He said nothing. Afterward, he thanked the server again. Not for the music, but for the reminder. He said that night had changed how he saw people. How easily talent could be overlooked. How important it was to listen. The server nodded. They understood. Life did not become perfect. There were still challenges. Still doubts. Still long days. But the weight of regret had lifted. The server no longer wondered what might have been. They were living it. One evening, while walking home, a stranger stopped them and said they had heard their music recently. Just a simple comment. But it stayed with them. The server smiled and kept walking. They thought about the first time they had touched a piano as a child. About the years of silence. About the moment they had been pushed toward the keys at a party they never planned to change. What began as a joke had become a turning point. The server understood now that talent does not disappear. It waits, quietly, patiently, and sometimes all it needs is one moment to be seen. As the city lights glowed ahead, the server walked forward with steady steps, carrying music not as a dream, but as part of who they were. The future felt open, and this time they were ready.